Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. We are an international community of people in and connected to the financial services sector. We're a community that believes that the finance industry is profoundly important to the well-being of society, to economic stability, political stability, and of course, to the welfare of the planet itself. We think the finance industry is simply too important to be allowed to continue to misbehave. So we're doing all we possibly can to reduce the incidence of malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, mis-selling, all the sorts of things that have over the years, sadly, got the finance industry into trouble. We're particularly concerned about the fact that there is a mountain of evidence suggesting that many people around the world simply do not trust the finance industry. And we think that's a really big problem that needs to be dealt with. We think it is a systemic risk for the finance sector to continue to be distrusted. And we genuinely want to do all we can to try to remedy that problem. We've developed what we call a framework for finance reform, which we call the 12 Finance Development Goals. And one of them, arguably one of the most important, is leadership. We think leadership has a tremendous opportunity to reform and reshape and reinvigorate the purpose of the financial services sector. So we are always very, very keen to meet and be introduced to people that have built a reputation during their career for being leaders that lead an ethical, progressive and purposeful way. Leaders that have managed to create successful commercial enterprises without sacrificing their principles. They haven't put profit before their principles. They haven't put money before their morals. And we think these people are special. We think these people have the potential to be influential. They're great examples to others. And that's why we kind of developed the idea of carrying out video interviews of individuals like that, so we can try to amplify their message, which we hope will encourage others to lead in a similar fashion. And of course, we're also very keen to create a community of ethically minded leaders around the world as well. So that's what this is all about. The Transparency Task Force is crystal clear on our mission. Our mission is to promote ongoing reform of the financial sector so that it serves society better. And our vision is to build a highly respected, and for me, those two words are very, very important, a highly respected international influential institution that is dedicated to helping ensure that consumers are treated fairly. And it goes without saying that one of the issues that we discuss and focus on very, very frequently is the interface between the finance industry and the absolute imperative of making sure that we preserve the well-being of our planet as well. And that, I'm sure, is a point that's going to come up during the conversation today. Our interview today is being conducted by Debbie Henderson. Debbie runs the Centre for Inspired Leadership. She's an inspiring leader in her own right, and we're extremely grateful to her for the time and effort that she's been putting in on a purely voluntary basis to help us with this very, very important leadership project. So I'm going to pass over to Debbie and we'll go from there. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And may I say, first up, as an ambassador of TTF, Transparency Task Force, it is a real pleasure to be here, to be interviewing Laurie Spengler, who I'll introduce in a minute today, and above all, to be helping to represent what you, Andy, have been a stand for so many years, and in particular, those setting up TTF nearly 6 years ago now. And what you've accomplished in that 6 years is extraordinary. And I encourage anybody to look at the website to see what that is. A brief word on myself. I am Canadian, based in London, started out my career in the sell side of finance, Morgan Stanley in New York, corporate finance, and then moved to London in the early, well, actually now in the early 80s, still in corporate finance, and moved over to the capital market side of the business. And in about the early mid 90s, I began to feel, I actually thought I was getting married to move to Denver. I was going to move into asset management. and the universe had other plans. And that had me rethink my life. And I began to realize what I felt was most important is what Andy is speaking to, is leadership in financial services, leadership and culture, creating healthy culture. And I decided that I wanted to dedicate the rest of my life to studying that and supporting that, if possible, within the sector. I am delighted today to be here with Laurie Spengler, who has a wonderful career that you're going to hear a little bit about and hear her wisdom from that, of starting out in law and having a passion right now for impact investing, where she will declare actions speak louder than words. And you can see that on her website, where she is the CEO and founder of Courageous Capital Advisors. Those three words almost say what is involved right away. It is about courage. It is about making her mark. It is about following her convictions. And as Andy spoke to, in an ethical way, from having started in law and then moving into finance as to where she felt she could make a difference. We'll hear her story more from her in a moment. Laurie works on the transaction creating side of impact investing, which is important to understand. And she started out her career, as I've mentioned, in law, with a JD in law from Harvard and an undergrad from Stanford, starting with White and Case, and then moving in, actually, amazingly, she will say, I will say, to Prague, and actually pulling together what ended up becoming almost the first impact investing type of organization. And later was able, as she sold that to a management buyout, moved then to be working with Triodos, which then became an Include. And from that, well, Triodos and Include together, Laurie can tell us more. And subsequently from that, stepped down and set up Courageous Capital Advisors out of London not too long ago. Laurie, please do tell us if there's what else you would like to add to my introduction, because I know there are many other roles that you're playing as speaker and as board member, and that would just help us fill out much of your beautiful profile right now.
Well, thank you, Debbie, and thanks to Andy. It's a delight to be with you today. And you did an amazing job, I have to say. So thank you for that whirlwind reminder of my own milestones along this career trajectory. I think the only thing I would add, Debbie, is that throughout my career, I have been quite intentional about building organizations, but also contributing to the field. And so I have always participated in an advisory capacity or governance capacity in what I would call field building organizations. And that's a contribution of my time that I just take very seriously. So in our financial conversation, the Global Alliance for Banking on Values is an extraordinary organization that I believe has come up a couple of times in your interviews. And I had the privilege to be around that table when it was really first an idea back in 2008 and 2009, and then have contributed time, energy, and effort to the Alliance as it has grown. Keeping on the theme of impact investing, I'm on the board of the UK Impact Investing Institute in a voluntary capacity. And that really is the go-to community for sharing and hopefully encouraging people to deploy capital with impact imperative and impact integrity, and I can share more about that. But the field building aspect I would just add, and maybe the final point, Debbie, to contextualize the conversation that we're going to dig into on trust and transparency within financial services. I am not, confession, I'm not a commercial banker. I have not been a commercial banker. I have worked with many commercial bankers and have advised financial institutions on how they can attend to their own strategies, but also mobilize expansion capital to pursue their endeavors. So I've been an advisor to banks. I certainly have worked inside investment banks and created my own impact investment bank. I've worked with development finance institutions, which are another important part of our financial services community, with fintech organizations, with CDFIs. So there's been I would say a lot of touchstones within financial services, which I really appreciate, quite honestly, from my own perspective. And also, I hopefully I can share some of that, the insights and learnings in the topics we're going to dig into from those various vantage points.
Fabulous. Laurie, just for our audience as well, CDFI, Community
Oh, of course, exactly.
Finance Development
Institution.
Institute, right, in the
So
US.
it's a regulated bank like any other kind of bank, but it has a particular focus on serving low and moderate income communities.
And primarily in the US, or has it gone outside the US now?
Also in the UK now, there's quite a growing community developed banking community here in the UK, but it's most known, Debbie, you're right, as a segment of the financial institution community in the United States.
Okay, wonderful. Well, and we've had one interview already with Darren Williams in that area. So I just wanted to clarify so people can start to put their insights and understanding around this. You brought up trust and transparency, which is what the organization that Andy founded is about. It's about the mission. And you started out in law and then moved into impact investing. But I'm curious from your perspective, why, if we're looking at the big picture, why do you feel we have trust and transparency issues overall I'll say generally in the finance sector? What would, if you put 2 or 3 things to put your finger on it, what would it be?
Right, I think it's a great question, and for me, Debbie, it starts with thinking about 2 fundamental principles. The first is that I look at money as an enabler. Money is in service of society, and specifically, it's in service of people and the planet. And secondly, my fundamental principle is that banks are stewards of other people's money. So if we combine those 2 principles, that's where trust and transparency pop out to me, meaning you cannot be an effective steward of other people's money unless you are trustworthy, have earned their trust, hold yourself accountable to delivering on that trust. And you can't actually enable the resource of money to be in service of the people and planet without transparency. You have to look at what's happening with the money. Where is it going? What's the destination of that money? And what is it doing when it gets there? And I think for me, that's my framework. So money in service of society and people and planet. I need transparency to see the distribution of that money, and most importantly, what's happening on the ground when it gets into someone's home, someone's small business, whatever it happens to be the final destination. We can dig into some of those examples. And then also that notion of stewardship, which I would posit, I think, has been lost by many members of the financial institution community, this notion of fundamental stewardship, because it's really not, it's money that's been entrusted to them. And I think that people have forgotten and, dare I say, violated that trust at times.
Okay, so what's interesting about this and the way you've shared is the word forgotten. As if we could go back, and probably that becomes the most important thing to do, is to go back to the original source of your comment. Money was meant to be, in its creation, an enabler. And for people to use it, we are meant to be, or advise around it, we are meant to be supporters, stewards for that enablement. So what's happened that are sort of some of the cornerstones from that original premise to, I realize it could just be humans got involved, but it's humans, it's structures, and something got involved that has us be where we are today, having this conversation. And so that's one question, is what happened. And the other is, if you were to even estimate from the people you meet in financial service, and I'm sure you're very selective who you meet with, would you even hazard a guess as to what the percentage is of people in financial services that are in the camp of I get enablement and stewardship versus those that are so far removed? Two
That's a
questions.
that's a really great question. So let's take your two components here. I mean, the people and structures, and of course, there's a lot to. There's regulation. I mean, there's a lot, and I'm sure many people have studied this. I'm not an expert on it, but you're asking me to share experientially.
Exactly.
My own, and that's the vantage point that I'm bringing. So just to clarify for the audience, I'm not trying to give my thesis on the evolution of financial institutions.
No.
That's not my expertise. But I like how you framed it, Debbie, on people and structures. And I would certainly say to you, at a minimum, I think people matter more than structure. And that goes a little bit to Andy's introduction about leadership. And so for me, if I had to rank those two, people definitely are more important than structure, because with the right leadership, you can navigate through all kinds of structures if you're clear on your vision, on your mission, and how you're holding yourself accountable to deliver on that. So that would be just one opening comment. But I want to touch upon structure. I think there is something, and there's some fairness to the notion that the structures of banking have become very complex, very large, that we have combined different types of financial activities under very large umbrellas. And we have all experienced, I think that has challenged the transparency issues. Even regulators are challenged to understand precisely what is going on inside some of these very large institutions. And I think that it is one factor. It's not an excuse, but it is a factor that I think we must acknowledge. There are ways then to deconstruct and to unpack and to still find our ways to identify the ways to have transparency inquiry into these institutions. So I say it's not an excuse, but I think it's, realistically, it is a factor that we should at least acknowledge. The second point I would say, Debbie, is that at some point along the past 20 to 30 years, the incentive structures inside financial institutions became singularly about the money, and not the destination of it, but getting it out the door, getting it back, making money on the money. Making money on the money became the paradigm that people were using to hold themselves accountable. Well, there's nothing about stewardship in that framework. There's nothing about that. And so what are you really incenting? You're not incenting behaviors that deliver on the stewardship in a way that's in service of people and planet. And so I think that's a link between structure and people. So I think that's a very important component to the story. And then going to people, which I said was, to me, was the primary driver. I do think that many people in the organizations, if you were to do a survey and ask the average person inside a bank, do you believe that money should be in alignment with positive results in the world and improving society? I think the average banker would say yes, at some level. I don't think there's an opposition to this statement of money in service of society, but I think it comes down to how. How do you then act inside that organization? And I think particularly inside some of the larger organizations where the leadership is not orienting the institution in that way, I think a lot of people who are working there may find dissatisfaction with what tools they have at their disposal, but still remain aligned with the bigger picture that we're starting our conversation with. So if I were to do that survey, you said how many people, I think there's a lot of people who would resonate with the starting point of our conversation, but also say, look, you have to recognize there are limitations. We're regulated institutions, so there are limitations on what we can and cannot do in service of society. There are limitations in terms of how we're incented and how we're held accountable and scrutinized ourselves. There are limitations to who else is around the table in our organizations. I mean, frankly, some of those factors led me to create my own business. So I do understand those challenges, but maybe I'll pause there to see if you want to dig into one of those.
Well, I think, yes, it's lovely. The other is let's just reflect for a second on your journey. And I'm curious how many people you found have followed a similar journey to your own, which was it seems to me that it was not to go into finance because, oh, I want the money for me, but it was more, I see finance as an enabler for me to deliver on my own sense of mission and purpose in life, where you'd originally started off thinking it was about law. And I'm curious how many people in your journey, and admittedly, maybe it's been facilitated by just focusing in on the impact area, that you have found people who naturally have been called to going into finance for the betterment of society, for the opportunity to have money be an enabler for society. There's that, and then how many discovered their soul, put it that way, if I call it that, while within the sort of man or woman in the mirror moment. I'm just
that's a great question. So you're right. So for me, my North Star of seeking and building and contributing in my modest way to a just, inclusive, resilient, sustainable society for all was set at a very young age. And I initially thought that law was going to be a lever point, a very powerful tool to advance towards that North Star. And what I discovered was actually money and finance is an even more powerful tool. And that really explains my migration from law into finance. And you're right, that's been my guidepost in all of the different choices and positions that I have held. To go to the core of your question, I think it's a great one. And I think in my experience in finance, because I've worked inside large bulge bracket investment banks, with lots of commercial banks, with community banks, with microfinance, a lot of big across the board. I would say for people going into finance as a field, and especially choosing finance as a field, I would say it is a small subset of people who are choosing that because ex ante they see finance as the tool for the change they seek in society. But I think there is a little big group and a growing group of people who discover, wow, money is incredibly powerful. And if I can contribute to directing it in this way, in advancement of positive environmental and social change in society, that is something to feel proud of, to feel excited about, to join others in pursuing. And so I do think there are more and more people within financial institutions who are recognizing that. And it's a combination. It's both looking inward, but also being informed by what's happening around you. I mean, if you're paying attention, obviously, to the various crises that are affecting society, if you're an informed citizen, you're seeing those forces. And then you're asking yourself, well, are there things that I'm doing in my day-to-day life that actually could be contributing to the positive changes and not contributing to the path that we're on now? And then finally, I would say there's a groundswell of organizations. There are banks who are dedicated to this mission. The community banks we talked about, microfinance institutions, the Global Alliance for Banking Members, not all of whom are community banks. There's a growing universe, development finance institutions. This is their mission and purpose. So you also even have more vocational opportunities if this is what you decide to do. You can be a change agent within your existing institution, or you can also join an institution that has an explicit mission to use money in service of people and planet. So I think that's also a factor for why we're seeing more and more finance professionals raise their hand to say, I want to be doing this. I want to be contributing in this way.
And this becomes really fascinating, because I'm sure that as Andy is listening to this, he will be smiling as he's sort of sensing, yes, please speak about those people that will be finding their heart and their soul from he's come back on to show he's listening and nodding. Find those people from inside who might be able to have that aha moment of, what am I doing with my life and how do I want to make a switch? So now, if we think about, if you're an informed citizen, that could be one pincer movement. The amount of competition growing might be another pincer movement. I'm wondering if it isn't children who could be getting a pincer movement, as in, dad or mom, what are you doing with your life, for the man in the mirror moment? And then maybe even the sense of their own, I don't like using the word misery, but disconnect, discovery of the disconnect from wherever it might come, that those could be impulses as to why. But I'm curious if you've got other comments on that from stories or people you've met, because what we're seeking to do is to appeal to an audience who will be either themselves looking at this question or influencing others in their organization or organizations that they work with across the board
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point, Debbie, on the children and on this dissatisfaction, disconnection, that inner journey that we all at times look inside and are taking our own temperature inside, or we should be. So on the children, I think it plays out in a couple of different ways. I think children they're being exposed differently to social and environmental issues in their curriculum, in their social interaction, social media. And so their exposure set is different than their parents' exposure set on the issues. I think their attitudes also often are different in a very healthy way. So I think that's absolutely right. I speak in my own family, especially with my nieces and nephews, who are definitely, they ask probative questions at the dinner table. They really want to explore some of these topics, and they're connecting dots. So if you say you care about the environment, what are you doing apart from expressing that through maybe your vote and other forms of expression in community? What are you doing with your resources? Are there choices, consumer choices you are making, banking choices you are making, no matter what your means are? I mean, I think what's really powerful about that awakening is that this is not for the ultra high net worth individuals. This is not a limited inquiry for people of very significant financial means. This is an inquiry for each one of us. Everybody's got a bank account. Where are you putting your money? You're saying something about that. Everybody purchases clothing. What are you saying about that? You buy food. All of these things. And I think the younger generation, because as they start to make those choices for themselves and their social consciousness is alerted, then they're connecting those dots in very powerful ways. And the other way it plays out, I think, also is transfers of wealth. We're seeing that especially in parts of the impact investing arena. There's a gender dynamic in transition of wealth from men to women, intergenerational transitions where you see some of the family offices and foundations where you've seen that intergenerational play. Look at Rockefeller Brothers Fund and how the environmental agenda really dialed up when the younger generation was actually participating in the governance of the fund. I mean, this has been written about quite a lot. They in fact changed their money manager as a result of that younger generation coming into voice around the table. So I think that the youth element is a very powerful one, but it's not just in your own household. There are lots of ways that plays out. And then I really like your internal reflection and that disconnect. And that is what I think I'm trying to at least begin to allude at, Debbie, when I mentioned if you took a survey of people working in financial services, I think the vast majority of them would absolutely align with Andy's opening, would align with what I shared about money in service of society. I think there would be a predilection that you should find ways to express your values with financial resources. I think all of that would get positives. But then I think you're right. I think especially as people mature in your lives, and also you recognize, look, we're not here forever. I mean, this is a finite amount of time I am here. And what do I want to be doing with my energy, my intellect, my contributions, and whatever my area of expertise is? And is there a way to align who I am as a person with what I do professionally? And the most satisfied people I know, the most dynamic, engaged leaders I've had the privilege to work with or to observe are those who are the same human being in every conversation in their life. They're the same person. They don't put on a coat and go into a professional environment and be a certain way and then go home or be with their community in another way. They're the same person. The most extraordinary example of that is Sir Fazli Abed, who was the founder of BRAC, BRAC Bank is a member of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. Sadly, Sir Fazli Abed passed away at the end of 2019, but he was an extraordinary figure. And I had the privilege to work with him for over 15 years as an advisor across, he set up fintech companies, a bank, microfinance, lots of things in many, many countries. And he was the same person, whether he was sitting with the president of a country or with a group of women borrowers in rural Bangladesh. He was the exact same human being. And I know that because I was present in both meetings, so I could observe it. And that is powerful.
Wow. What I'm picking up from this and your description is egolessness, which strikes me one of the most challenging elements when we're in the finance sector, if we don't really know ourselves, because money can become a tremendous projection magnet for those insecure part of ourselves, and we can bubble wrap ourselves around money. But I'm curious about any further reflections you have on that. And then, since we're speaking about society and change, I'm wondering what thoughts you have about what the impact of the pandemic and lockdown might be on people undertaking that personal journey work in order to say what is important and how am I going to align myself, since my family is around me all day, every day now anyway, while I'm in, so that it's just as if, could the pandemic lockdown actually have a benefit for us in this type of internal work that's needed? Or often
Great questions. Great questions. So I'll make an attempt at both of them. So on the first one, you said egolessness. I think you're right. For me, I think it is humility. So I think, and the reason I say that, Debbie, is in observing people like Sir Fazli Abed, Darren Williams, who you've mentioned, has been interviewed, is that I think the reason humility is so important is that people in leading financial organizations of the type we're talking about really are asking, to what end? To what end is this money helping, contributing, advancing? And unless you are humble in asking the question, you won't hear the answer. You won't hear it. You literally will not, you won't see it and you won't hear it. And so I do think it's humility, and it's humility because you genuinely want to know that answer so that it can inform your decisions about products and services and pricing and rollout and growth and incentive structures. If you're a leader of financial institution, and if you believe truly in that stewardship and service combination that I mentioned at the beginning, then your behavior really should be humble. And I think you're spot on right that money itself became the measure of success, of your personal success and of the institutional success, as a single metric, when in fact it wasn't supposed to be the metric. It was supposed to be the input to other achievements, and those should be the things we hold ourselves accountable for. But as I say, we lost the plot, and money became the destination, and then the means by which we're measuring ourselves. So that would be my comment on the first point. And on the second point, yeah, I mean, lockdown has been challenging for everyone in quite different ways. And if I've learned one thing about this in connecting with people from their homes, is just that we need to be compassionate and kind and generous and understanding, because everybody's circumstance is different. And the lines and that in our lives between personal and professional are completely blurred, if not removed altogether. And so there's an intimacy that you discover despite this separate physical separation. There's also an intimate connection that you're having with people in different ways. And I think that really invites us to be, Andy used the word respectful of one another and compassionate of one another. So I think that's a one aspect that I hope we don't lose. I think it's really an important awakening for all of us. I think we have it, but it dials it up in a lockdown scenario. And because of those boundaries, I think you're right. I think the conversations you're having at home, certainly it's true for me. I mean, I always talked about my work. I mean, if I didn't separate those discussions, but people can overhear me in this conversation. So I can imagine this evening, my husband and I will have a more interesting conversation about this conversation, as opposed to me reporting out, oh, I had this very interesting discussion with Debbie today about trust and transparency in financial services. So I think that the interconnectedness of our days invites you to go deeper and see that what I alluded to with the young perspective, the connection between what you're doing and what you care about and those issues. But the other thing I would say, Debbie, is that I think the lockdown has also lockdown combined with other dynamics in society. And speaking as an American, my own society, having gone through a very tumultuous election period last year, but if we just stick to COVID, it is exposing deep racial and resource schisms in society. It didn't cause it, but it revealed and exposed the depth of these structural schisms. And I am hopeful that that reveal for people who might have been cognizant but not really willing to confront those schisms, I am hopeful that that will deepen people's inner exploration to say, you know what, these needs are urgent, they are real, they are significant, and finance and money can be a contributing force for positive change. It's not the only thing that is needed, absolutely not. Money alone will not solve these issues, whether we look at them through the environmental lens, the social lens, whatever lens we put on, the gender lens, but money can certainly be a powerful force for positive change if we do it well. So I am hopeful that the lockdown experience, we won't just turn our eyes and close the chapter, that we'll actually learn from it and lift from it.
Yeah, I think there's so much we could actually explore in this area, and I'll just share one because I don't want to go on to a couple of other questions I had. It was just the thought that lockdown has become such a leveler, because even those with money who might have traveled and da-di-da-di-da, where money then becomes part of their sense of freedom and luxury, actually are in the same boat. We're all in the same boat, where it's almost prison therapy that we're going through, of having to then go inside in the solitude times of saying what's really important to me. And, oh, I'm seeing this going on outside. And how do I want to live my life? And even having their conversations about life and death and all that element of it. So it's interesting to just look at this. What could be the gift out of this, instead of us all railing against what we don't want? What could be the gift just in this conversation? It's dawned on me because it seems so poignant. We're able to now have these video calls and share, which we might have done otherwise in face-to-face. And look how many opportunities there are for sharing leadership principles right now, for instance.
And I think it's such a great point, Debbie, and maybe linking your point to what I was saying earlier about what we're learning, what we're seeing in society, is that maybe it will also be an invitation for people to use their voice in more effective ways, because of that leveling, as you said, that there isn't this kind of hierarchical structure that we're within in our organizations. We're working remotely, so you don't even feel that there's no top floor in the building. Like, I've got to take the elevator up to get to the top floor to speak to the CEO. Well, no, actually, we're talking to each other or my manager from our respective home environments. It's a great point. And so maybe it will encourage all of us to use our voice in even more effective ways.
Wow, I love that.
Speak up in an organization. And I think it's also, because Andy talks so much about leadership, I think leaders should be harnessing some of the lessons of COVID and lockdown and use that leveling up or leveling point that you made, that to say, let me make sure I don't lose that in the culture of my organization and in the communication with my organization. I think there's some really good insights there, Debbie. I think you're spot on right.
Wow. Well, let's take this further to explore your discoveries of leadership in the sector. And because I want to ask about what your discoveries are in the impact sector, who you are discovering. I mean, I'm curious about the youth in there, but also how you have found the best way to lead. But just before we go there, so that's planting the seed for the question, I'm realizing in terms of the leveler, the part that I love is we all have the same square, the same rectangular size box in terms of the size of our office or our visibility. It's just exactly the same size box on the Zoom screen.
It's such a good point. It's such a good point. I love that. I love that.
So, so take us to your own discoveries of leadership in the impact investing arena, what you found was most effective principles of leadership, whether you wish to start with values, maybe even some of your aha moments of where you had to take really tough decisions that you didn't see coming, but there were sort of, again, the leadership moments in the sector that might be helpful for our audience to be relating to impact investing in particular, but also your style of leadership and what your discoveries were there.
Right. Yeah, that's a rich area of discussion, and I'll do my best to get us started. But please jump in and help me here, because it's a big waterfront. So I mean, first of all, I just to also help with our conversation with the audience. I mean, with impact investing, I don't get too fussed about definition. And an impact investment banker working in impact investing, or describing myself somewhere like that. All I really am talking about is really that first principle I led with. For me, impact investing is about using money, and namely in the form of investment, so investment capital, with the intention to generate a positive social and environmental return while achieving a financial return. So it is investment activity. So there is an expectation of the return trip of capital. There's a big spectrum of what and how that money is returned, depending upon what you're solving for. So for me, my starting question is always, what are we solving for with this investment capital? And I analyze that first through the lens of the people or planet solution that we are endeavoring to advance. And you know, it gets down to very specific transaction thesis and strategies and all of that. But I just wanted to kind of frame that's what I mean generally by impact investing. And I think, to be honest, Debbie, I would say that I would maybe answer the question in two parts. So for me, it just generally as a leader, because quite early in my career, I left a large institution and set up my own company. And I think, to be honest, it wasn't you know, we all look back at it wasn't ego driving that. I mean, we all have ego, so of course there was an ego element. But when I really think about what motivated me to do it, it was this sense that I did not feel. I learned great things inside the big organizations that I worked with, but particularly inside the investment banks, I just felt that my principles, again, going back to Andy's introduction, my principles, although I wasn't silenced, I could express them, and I am my own person, but I couldn't be led by them. I didn't feel that my principles led my professional activity, decisions, undertakings. And that's what I wanted. Because it goes back to my North Star, and I have it. It's been clear in my mind. I don't have the answers, but I have where I want to try to contribute towards has been clear. And then try to figure out, okay, what are the pathways to try to nudge our way there, and then using finance as the tool and the instrument. And so for example, the choice of what mandates do you take on, the filter, the vet, what mandates do you take on? There's only so many hours in the day. What deals are you going to choose to bring to market? What deals are you going to choose to structure? Well, I want to be able to set my criteria based on the end destination of the capital. What problem are we solving for with the capital? I'd rather do the climate change fund about advancing forestry investments than I would another manufacturing facility of a product that people may need, but it's not out of the gate, not to disparage the product, but it's not contributing directly, at least as I see it, in advancing the needs of people and planet. And I wanted to have the ability to express that choice. So the mandates, see what you take on. The pricing of our products and services, I want it to be affordable. So obviously I'm making a choice that my decision in setting up a firm was not to maximize, what will the market bear? What can I possibly charge on this? No, for my solution set, the kinds of deals that I want to bring to market, what's a reasonable price for those services? To enable the firm to be viable, absolutely. So there was a viability consideration, which is completely reasonable and legitimate, but it wasn't a maximization. That's the single objective here. So I wanted to have the freedom to be able to do that. I also wanted to have the freedom in my principles to build the culture of decision-making, governance, tone. I wanted to set it in a way that I just didn't feel I was able to. So for me, understanding as a leader, you set the tone from the top, both by your words, but more importantly, much more importantly, by your actions, which is why the tagline to my new firm is where actions speak louder than words. I love to write. I love to speak. In this conversation on panels, we all do so much. I love to speak at staff meetings, wherever. I enjoy that. I love talking to students. But ultimately, leadership for me is about behavior and actions. And I do think you as a leader need to hold yourself accountable. You're the most important person to hold yourself accountable for what you say you care about, your values, your principles, your objectives, your results. Because in impact investing, and I'll segue to that part, it's all about, if I start with the question, to what end? What is the capital solving for? Obviously, I want to hold myself accountable to, well, did we achieve that result? Did that money actually help that community we said we were going to help? Did it really get to that rural location we said we wanted to have that money get to that rural location? Did it achieve the objective? And being transparent to the opening of our discussion and making sure, and when it doesn't, if it didn't get there, and if it didn't achieve the objective, actually learn from that. There's a feedback loop to transparency and accountability, or there should be. It's not a compliance perspective, it's a learning perspective. And sometimes I really wonder how we lost the understanding of that as well, that transparency it's inquiry, and you shine a spotlight because you want to see where to go. And if you didn't end up at the place you thought you were going to go, well, then how do you get back to that place, and how do you improve? So those things that I learned in being a leader early on and setting up my own firm, about ensuring that my principles, I really led with that. But most importantly, that I really challenge. I made many mistakes. We all make many mistakes. I don't want to suggest otherwise, but challenging myself that my actions are the barometer of my leadership integrity, not my words. And then in the impact field, I do feel like I'm around allies. I feel that my fellow leaders are asking the same questions. And that's been gratifying, that's been bolstering, that's been energizing. I mentioned Sir Fazle Abed as just one of my personal and professional heroes, but there are many, many people in the impact investing field. And I think it goes back to that humility point. We don't have the answers, but there's a commitment and a conviction to the quest, to the path, to the pursuit. And that gives you, if you really are certain about that, it gives you an incredible license to have open discussion and to learn even from one another. You don't have to be defensive. So many people in leadership positions, I find, adopt very defensive styles of communication, especially internally. And that's the last thing I would say. But I think the big test for institutions when you're leading, are you aligning your external articulations of vision, mission, objectives with your internal culture and behaviors? And I would say that test is incredibly important for mission-driven organizations. And it is true that you can't always see that. There's sometimes a disconnect, and that is something that has to be attended to. That's on leadership. That's on the leader.
Wow, how gorgeous. So let me just dig into a few of these, starting with this last point about the external and the internal alignment. And I think we can both probably acknowledge that what can happen when we have this zeal for wanting to make a difference with others, frequently we can forget to put our own oxygen mask on first. And all our energy can be outside, but we're not taking care of the internal. And then we expect the internal to be able to operate on itself because we're doing such great service for the external world. And is that part of the disconnect that you can see that could happen?
I do. So I think you make a very good point, Debbie. I think you're right. There's let's call it, there's the kind of the self actor, you as an actor. And I think a lot of people have been writing about this in the context of lockdown. Are you attending to your own health, your needs, your mental, physical, spiritual needs as a committed professional? And certainly in the context of leadership. So I think that's a very appropriate consideration. And I think you're right. Not everybody carves out that time or attends to it in the way needed. And I think lockdown, on the one hand, people are like, well, I mean, I'm not traveling so much, so I have more time. But the time is spent differently. And you're right, you can deplete. We all can deplete our inner resources. So I think the self as an actor, I think that's fair. I was also addressing, Debbie, that I think organizationally, I have seen the challenge where a mission-driven organization expresses its mission in a very compelling and convincing way through the work that it does and to the external audience. But when you actually look at how they work internally, how they treat their colleagues, how they make decisions internally, the culture of the organization does not always align with the mission expression and the great work that they do externally. And again, I'm not trying to beat anybody up in this conversation. I'm sharing what I've learned. And what I have learned, and I have a recent example when I was on the board of such an organization, and we were launching a new initiative, and we were focusing initially, this new initiative, it was around a gender, and it was a gender strategy. And the organization, great work, smart approach, terrific strategy, relevance for the communities to be served, was about to launch the external strategy that would commence several years of activity. And what we realized around the board table in conversation with management was that, wait a minute, let's pause here and look at what's going on around gender inside this organization.
Voila.
And we paused launching the external strategy until we had the time to have the conversation, to do some analysis, to decide what we wanted to do to improve the gender dynamics, the gender participation, the gender considerations inside. And what was great is then by the time we launched the external strategy, we were more credible. We felt stronger as an organization. We were aligned, everyone around the table. So it was terrific. But it really opened my eyes to the essential requirement of looking inside and not only focusing on the great work. And I think the danger of that disconnect is more pronounced in a mission-driven organization, a mission-driven financial institution, a mission-driven bank, community bank, as we talked about, whatever it is, big bank, small bank, doesn't matter where you are, global north, global south. There's more of a risk there because you are so driven by the mission. It's such the pull factor for the external market engagement. But then I think there's a higher bar for you internally to ensure that you are not opening up to that disconnect.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I meant by investing in the internal culture.
That's
so
right.
that it's balanced and can serve the external in the process that you're saying about alignment and so on.
Exactly.
You've spoken to the importance of leadership North Star. I might even call it moral compass, but it's something that you feel you've got a very clear definition for yourself of sort of the filter on where the money is going, product, and all the analysis to be able to undertake that. And I'm curious, just a reflection for you on your personal journey, and then as in when you knew how old were you when you knew you had a North Star? And how did you keep honing it? And did it ever wobble at any time for you? And then to keep it clean and clear and central in your own self-management, leadership management. I'm just curious about where do you give feedback to yourself or do you collect feedback from others? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Great questions, Debbie. Oh, you asked such good questions. They're really hard too. They're really hard questions. Yeah, I think truthfully, I wouldn't have expressed it in the way that I did today when I was a teenager or young, but it was there. I'm definitely, and what I've learned, I think I shared this with you, Debbie, in another conversation. What I have learned is there's no right or wrong here about when people identify, discover, express a North Star. So I do not want to come across in any way as judgmental about that. And I've it's kind of interesting when you have that, when you ask people that question. And at any moment in your life, I find you can identify what really anchors your moral compass as a human being at any moment in your life. But for me, it was early on. And where did it come from? It's a combination of factors. Obviously, it's certainly your family that influences you. And my father, as I've spoken about in other interviews, was a big influence in my life. He was a serial entrepreneur. I had the privilege of, in small and medium-sized enterprises. He really defined his success through the lens of we, not me. So what do I mean by that? How are the staff doing? What's going on in the local community? It was just the way he talked about business at the dinner table. It wasn't how's the P&L? What does that mean for our family? Can we go on a vacation this year? And he was an entrepreneur. So some years we did have a vacation and some years we didn't have a vacation. I mean, it was a very up and down childhood. And I think that also sensitized me to, it's not always predictable when you're an entrepreneur. I mean, we were fine. We were a middle-class family. It was fine. We didn't, there was no hardship. I don't want to suggest that, but there was an uncertainty. There was an uncertainty. And understanding how you navigate through uncertainty, I think that was something that I was exposed to early on, which I really value. I really appreciate that. I have a tolerance for ambiguity, and it doesn't shake my confidence about the clarity of where we're going ultimately. And I think that was definitely from early on. But this notion of we matters more than me, in your language, even how you talk about achievements, when in school, in sports, in business, those were definitely influential factors. And then maybe the other part was a curiosity about other people. So people you didn't necessarily see, people you didn't, either because they weren't a member of your community, they weren't in your geographic proximity, you just weren't exposed to them, but you would read about them. And so this curiosity was certainly encouraged. And I think it's one of the reasons why I've pursued a cross-cultural life my entire life. I'm also, I'm married to someone from a different culture. I live my life outside my own country of birth. I've spent time living in Taiwan and China and parts of Europe, and travel extensively to sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And I so enjoy that. There's something that I really benefit from. The exposure and the learnings to other cultures. And when you engage with someone who on the surface comes from such a different background and place, and you seem like just two different people from two different worlds, and you connect on something around a value, a principle, an activity you're doing, it's incredibly energizing and powerful. And I just love all of that. So those were so my North Star was clear, and I think it's influenced from some of the things that I have shared. My relationship with my North Star absolutely changes over time. And I gave one example, you invited it in the introduction. I thought that law was going to be a very specific, concrete tool to advance towards that North Star. And I started off representing homeless individuals in the Boston area after I graduated from Harvard, and I would come out of a court and have a victory on paper. Here's your right to housing. And my client, who's homeless, would say, well, Laurie, that's wonderful, but where am I going to sleep tonight? And it was literally that recognition that, oh my goodness, I've quote unquote won, and there's a right to housing, but unless there's enough affordable housing, that voucher is of no use and no value whatsoever. So I was hunting then for the tangibility of results that could advance closer to the North Star. And that's actually how I got into finance. So my relationship with the North Star, I would say, has sharpened, has crystallized, but I'm constantly asking myself, what's the most effective pathway? Constantly. I mean, it's like if you're going to climb Kilimanjaro, which I did do actually with my husband. If you're going to climb, you switch back. There's switchbacking. There's which is the right pathway up. What's the most effective within under what circumstances and what conditions. So you have to be agile and full of inquiry, but I'm still debating that myself, Debbie. I'm clear about what I want to try to contribute towards, but how I do it has certainly changed and evolved over time. And then have I been shaken? Sure. When the path seems blocked, yeah, you think, wow, is my destination in challenge, or my kind of aspirate? It's really more of an aspirational destination. Let's be clear. A North Star, it's an orientation. It's not like a final destination. So yeah, blockages, shake your confidence, constant rejection when you're pitching deals. I'm on the sell side, so when I'm pitching capital for deals that have very clear positive social and environmental results that I can measure and talk about and people find it compelling, but still the answer is no, I'm not going to invest in that. Sure, that begins to shake you. And you tell yourself, okay, you got to be a bit of a pioneer. You've got to be pushing on the edge here because that's okay, and change will come. But it can be lonely and hard, and then you ask yourself, am I not effective enough? Am I not, if the change isn't happening fast, am I not effective? So am I not doing, what am I doing wrong? And so to your last point, absolutely, I seek feedback. And it is hard when you've been a CEO consistently. Where do you get that feedback from? You have to be, people will not give it to you unless you ask for it. They just won't. And so you have to really ask for it and then create the environment for it. And don't just ask it like a flippant question, and people will filter what they're going to say because they're worried about how you'll interpret it or the consequences to them if they do say openly what they're thinking. So you have to not just ask the question, but you have to frame it in a way that enables people to trust that you will receive the message in the spirit intended. And I've learned over the years, and the art of the question is so important. How you ask a question. And you're brilliant at it, Debbie, obviously, as you've displayed in our conversations and in all of these other interviews. But the art of the question is really important.
Wow, dear Laurie. But I'm also hearing how important it is that you as leader create safe space so that when you're asking that question as well, over time, they understand what the intention is around it for the feedback. And this loops back to your comment about humility, it seems to me. And what I was just remember a piece of research at one point when I looked at the word humility to go, what's the root of the word? And I went, oh, it's humus, ground. So we feel grounded while at the same time holding our North Star, as in we're not so highfalutin or whatever, we are grounded and we create that safe space for our people accordingly.
Absolutely. Could I say one thing? I have to say that's so beautifully expressed. And I would say one reason, Debbie, no matter where I was, whatever position, I always, even as CEO, I always did deals, meaning I always challenged myself to be grounded. And I would always at least touch one transaction, if not more, in the course of a year and get out to the local community where that money is going to. Because unless you stay grounded as a practitioner, it is easier to lose the plot around stewardship and service. It's just, we're all human beings, and perspective matters so much. And I love going to the field. I love time in community, wherever it is. I mean, it's going to be an urban environment, rural environment. What I mean is the company we're financing, whatever the destination of that capital is, but spending time there, it's critically, it goes to your point about grounding. I just didn't want to lose that.
This feels really important when we look back to the whole question of trust and transparency, how easy it is when we do not connect with the end, when we do not connect and understand how money is impacting people, humanity on the ground. We can stay in our ivory tower otherwise and be oblivious of impact, and in that space find ourselves swirling around with this intangible, almost ungrounded product or service, which can possibly not be one of the elements that can knock us off center or our core unless we really have a very strong North Star.
Right. So in fact, exactly. I mean, to be honest, I mean, it's also smart business. I mean, if you to have that feedback loop, to understand what your product or service is really doing or not doing in the hands of the people you were intending to serve. I mean, yes, you should want to know the answer. You should, in my view of leadership, you should want to know that. I am saying that as a norm. But even just from a pure business practice, You should want that because it's going to give you the kind of feedback and input you want to know whether you should be expanding in that product or service, or tweaking that product or service, or changing something about it. I mean, or stopping it, pulling it from the market, because guess what? It's not actually achieving the desired results. So I mean, I find it the most grounded way to lead, but I would also argue, even if you didn't share that view, just purely on business feedback, one should be doing that.
Well, how lovely. So business feedback, ground, to make sure we're not in this intangible space. And what I'm picking up is, especially in the impact field, you'll be able to have some kind of heart connection, it seems to me, with what's actually going on, and seeing and feeling the impact, either through the visible change or people's smiles, etc. And that must do wonders for feeding the soul and giving one better energy to go back for the deal that didn't quite make it through the first pitch, but have the get up and go. And so anything further you'd like to share with us about your focus, particularly that enthralls you around the impact area, and any encouragement you might wish to make to any audience members who maybe feel they want to find their North Star and make a difference and venture into the impact space that they haven't been in. That's just as a couple of sort of wrap up questions, and I have one more after that.
Sure. So I mean, so building on your last point, I do feel it's a privilege to do the work that I do. I definitely feel that. I continue to learn every day and to challenge myself every day. And it is that combination, you are absolutely right, of kind of financial tools and the complexity of structuring that certainly pulls on experience and capability, but and really motivated by the results you can see. And you're absolutely right, Debbie. You see those results through the stories and the data. It's and, not or. It's both. You need the data and the stories. And I do feel privileged that my work invites me every day to have that combination of touch points, which is great. I would say about the impact investing world, a couple of things. One is it's different than it was a few years ago, meaning that it is growing. There's real momentum here. There is not a single chief investment officer on the planet who is not, at least at some level, asking questions about deploying capital more aligned with the values of the organization, the themes they care about, the sustainable development goals. There are many, many different ways you can frame a values-led financial conversation. It doesn't have to be just about your own moral compass. The sustainable development goals, I think, are a fantastic on-ramp, a very accessible framework. They're also quite attractive, but they're very accessible. There are many of them. And so no matter whatever theme your organization or your unit in the organization cares about, you can find a way to align with that. And I think that's a very helpful starting point, which leads to my second point. You don't have to be working inside a dedicated impact investing institution to pursue impact investing. You do not. More and more of the very large financial institutions of all types and stripes are pursuing, initially through ESG investing, that's kind of the starting point, but then at least some allocation to deeper impact. I mean, it's all on a spectrum. ESG to impact, it's a spectrum where impact you can go deeper and be more intentional and purposeful about the environmental and social challenges you're trying to tackle with your capital. But no matter, I would at least say, no matter where you sit in financial services today, if you really wanted to employ impact investing principles, activities, tools, opportunities, you could do it from your current position today. I would absolutely say that hand on heart. Now, if you want to transition into a dedicated impact investing opportunity set, there are more and more of us doing this across, again, the full ecosystem of financial institutions and financial services, where you were in your career on asset management, on wealth advisory. So lots of places to go. And I would say people with financial services skills are needed, because what we're doing, it's complex, it's sophisticated. These are, and in some ways, these deals are even more challenging than deals without impact considerations, because they're still transactions. They have all the same bells and whistles as a deal, whether it's a bond deal, whether it's an equity deal, whether it's a fund or a direct deal. I mean, it's the same tools that we're drawing upon, and we are embedding impact as the centerpiece of the deal. So it's not a substitute for all of those skills and familiar tools and instruments. It's an additional or an additive, if that's fundamental, that's at the core of the transaction. So there's a rich opportunity set for people to explore, either from their current position or if they want to pursue aligning themselves or participating more directly with a dedicated financial institution focused on impact.
Fabulous. Laurie, one other question, and that's as a sort of a wrap up about a future vision. If we're looking at the sector and recognize that so frequently the sector can operate in silos, and we're looking at dilemma for the planet and all the elements we're wanting to see right there, do you sense that impact investing could also become a model for more collaboration, a la Global Alliance for Banking and Values, but simply because we're looking at more heart and soul and more humility generally that's involved? And would there be more collaboration that could happen to help the sector overall on this trust and transparency too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned collaboration, because it's desperately needed, and it's a high touch sport. Collaboration it's a high touch sport, and takes time and commitment and energy and like-mindedness and challenge. And what I find the best collaborative engagements for me are when you have people who are not completely aligned come together, but they align in the result that they are ultimately trying to achieve, and that's incredibly exciting. And I would say the impact investing community is really good at that. They're really good at that. I mean, our whole attitude, I'm speaking generally, is very much, let's expand. That we're not a club. This is not a club. It's not, a small group of people who, okay, do you have the code? Can you get in the door? No, it's an approach to how we want to use money for good. It's an approach, and that approach has many, many, many applications. And so by definition, the impact investing community, those who have signed up to be part of it explicitly and dedicate 100% of their energies to it, people like myself, we are very, very excited about collaboration, especially when it's instigated by people you wouldn't expect to knock on your door and say, you know what, this is really interesting. I think maybe I'd like to explore this, or I'd like to be part of this. So I think absolutely. And one of the ways, Debbie, I think are some of the kind of methodologies and the measurement tools for how we even have the conversation around impact. That is a means by which collaboration can be spurred. What I mean by that is, I think a few years ago, everyone was saying, okay, impact investors, you have to then show us the positive impact in your deal. And they were pushing us to kind of dance on the head of a pin and make the case and make the case and make the case ex ante before you even put the money to work and find out what happens. But now I think, because people are really more conscious about the social and environmental issues we're discussing, they're saying every financial decision we have has impact, positive, negative. Let's now have a conversation across the entirety of the financial services activity set, and not just push our positive impact friends to make the case. Let's actually all of us challenge ourselves. And I think we've been collaborative partners, not to judge each other, but to engage. And I think that's a very hopeful pathway for collaboration and for change.
Super, fabulous. Thank you, Laurie, so very much. I could see Andy's got excited too by listening to this last part of the conversation, and will give us a little wrap-up comment now. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, Debbie. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. That was an absolute pleasure to listen to. I think I must have the best job in the world. I can sort of sit back and listening to a great conversation about such meaningful and important topics. Not just important, but also very, very timely. Given where we are, we're at a kind of a confluence of crises right now. People will look back at this time, and it's obviously going to become a very, very important inflection point. And I just hope there are enough people out there with the kind of mindset and attitude that Laurie has and Debbie has and people in the TTF community have, to really not waste this crisis, this confluence of crises, and come out of it all better, stronger, with a with a reimagined idea about what society is all about and what really matters. Laurie, there was so much in that to kind of think about. So much. You've left me with a very clear image of a task that I need to work on within the TTF. We are doing so many things. We're doing as much as we can, and I need to make sure that we are as efficient as possible in turning our energy and our aspirations into real change. Um, I say this because when you were speaking about the trek up Kilimanjaro and always asking the question, what is the most effective way? What is the most effective way? You kind of ooze this message, Laurie, that it doesn't, it's not just about doing the right thing, it's about doing the right things that actually work and actually make a difference. And I know that that's an area that I and TTF I can work on, and that's really left me with a very strong impression. I started to imagine what it would be like if you had you had a car with a very big, strong, powerful engine, but it had very skinny tires. So the car starts to roar away with this powerful energy, all this wonderful, exciting energy, all this horsepower dancing down to the tarmac, but it's got skinny tires. And all you get is lots and lots of wheel spin, loads of smoke, loads of noise, yeah, but very little forward action. And there's a real danger for all of us who are trying to make a difference to not be effective in what we're trying to do. And that is a really powerful message I picked up from you today, Laurie, and I'm very grateful to you for that. You also reminded me of one of my favorite quotes when you were speaking about action. Yeah, action speaks louder than words, and your website is dripping with all sorts of wisdom around that. And it reminded me of the Maya Angelou quote, which I hope I've got it verbatim here, is when people show you who they are, believe them. And what I believe she's saying is, when you see who people are, i.e. you see by their actions, don't you? It's not just what they say, it's what they actually do. And it's very clear, Laurie, that you are a committed industry activist. I think that's how you refer to on the website, an industry activist. This industry needs more activists. It needs more people with a commitment to a cause, a right cause. Everyone can have their own nuance and their own take about what really matters, but so long as we're all moving in generally the right direction, and that's a really powerful thing. So I feel very fortunate in having witnessed that wonderful conversation between the two of you, Laurie. Thank you so much. You are about as aligned to what TTF is trying to do as is imaginable, Laurie. You really are. Thank you so much. Thank you.
My pleasure, Andy, and my pleasure, Debbie. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, brill. Debbie, thank you so much as well. We'll bring things to a close. One final point, Laurie, I'll just get your initial reaction to an idea that we're working on. Having had the fortune of meeting people like yourself, we're saying to ourselves, well, rather than this just being a kind of a one-off interaction, why don't we try to build some momentum around the idea that good ethical leaders can make a difference individually, but if we were to find ways of aggregating that energy, we can make one and one add up to 3 or 4 or 5 or 7. So we're working on something called the International League of Ethical Financial Services Leaders. I think you'd be a perfect fit for it. And with your permission, I'll follow up separately about that. I think you might like it. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I would welcome that, Andy. Thank you.
Fantastic. Debbie, once again, thank you to you. Laurie talked about stewardship. Your stewardship of that conversation was superb. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurie, too.